CEO of LMG Security and author of the recently released book, Data Breaches. As a recognized expert in cybersecurity and data breach response, Sherri has been called a, quote, security badass, unquote, by the New York Times. That's quite the nickname. Her professional experiences are featured in the book Breaking and Entering, The Extraordinary Story of a Hacker Called Alien. Sherri is a GIAC certified forensic examiner and penetration tester, receiving her degree in computer science and electrical engineering from MIT. Today's topic is election interference and data breaches. Sherri will walk us through the strategies and tactics that hackers have successfully used to break into election-related organizations. She will discuss the rise of WikiLeaks and the Megaleaks infrastructure and show how data exposure evolved into sophisticated information distribution machines. Finally, she will highlight the known 2020 breach attempts and provide important tips for recognizing and protecting our elections against information warfare. During the program, should you experience any audio interference, such as static or intermittent audio due to a busy network, please use the optional phone connection, which is listed in the audio tab. We will also have a question and answer session at the end of the program. You may submit questions anytime by using the Q&A tab in the More section, or just save them until the end. All right, Sherri, we want to use this time to the best that we can, so we're just going to dive right in with your presentation.
Thanks so much, Maddie, and it is such a pleasure to be working with you guys today. I really appreciate it. I'm particularly excited because when I wrote the Data Breaches book, I had over 100 pages of information about espionage and election hacking and political information warfare that I had to cut because there just wasn't enough room in the book. There's a little bit in there, but this is really the first time I've had the opportunity to come out and to share how the story went. So really excited. Today, we're going to start off by talking about probably the biggest information leak so far of this election season, which is the Trump tax leaks. We'll talk about 2020 election hacking activity and election hacking attempts that we know about. We'll discuss, then we'll go back in time. We'll revisit the 2016 elections, talk about the Podesta emails that affected the Hillary Clinton campaign. We'll discuss WikiLeaks and how information productization started to become a major factor in United States elections. Obviously, it wasn't this way when we were kids. And then finally, we'll wrap up with the last DNC hacks and talk about what to expect in the coming weeks and how you can protect yourselves individually and also as a nation. Throughout this presentation, I just want to make it clear that my goal is to be non-partisan. We will discuss hacks and information warfare pertaining to one campaign or the other campaign. And the goal is just to sort of scientifically describe what is going on and how the elections have been under attack and getting manipulated and not really favoring one side or the other. So I just wanted to put out that disclaimer. So what we have seen over the past few weeks has been, number one, a leak of the Trump tax returns. The New York Times disclosed on September 27th that they had obtained copies of Trump tax returns for over 2 decades. And of course, one of the first things that happens is questions about authenticity. And that is something we should always be thinking about every time information gets leaked to the public. And Donald Trump himself came out and said, denied the New York Times report regarding the tax returns. So it's important to think about, how trustworthy are our sources. Of course, the New York Times is one of the most trustworthy sources in American media. How closely are they vetting their sources? And there are always limitations in what any of us can do. So we'll discuss this as we go along. When I first read this, my thought was, where did this information come from? I got to tell you, having studied data breaches for years, I have been waiting for the Trump tax returns to come out and suspected that they would come out within the 30 days before the elections. It was actually a little earlier than I expected. And for media outlets that do get a hold of these, there's always a balancing act because you want to be the first to disclose the scoop, but at the same time, these days, information is leaked at a time when it is going to get the most media media attention. So sometimes major media outlets will sit on information for weeks or even many, many months. And that's for two reasons. Again, one, to make sure that when it does get released, it is as powerful as it can be. And second, they often need that time to vet the information, to understand it, to create to distill it and create information products. And again, we're going to see that throughout this presentation. So where did these Trump tax returns come from? Unfortunately, we don't know, and part of that is because journalists do need to protect their sources. But here are a few places it could have come from. An accounting firm. The New York Times said that it was provided by a source with legal access to it, which is very interesting because in theory, this information could have come from hackers, but the fact that the source had legal access sort of implies that it doesn't. Other options could include the IRS or an employee at a state revenue department. Could have been in some kind of tax software that was being used by an accounting firm. That's not something a lot of people think of, but supply chains are absolutely major sources of information leaks. A bank employee could have leaked that information, or even Trump's own employees. One of the reasons we want to know where information came from is because you want to assess the risk that it has been doctored or that critical information has been left out of the package that you're receiving. Why do we care that information is left out? Well, because of course the picture you get could be skewed. In this case, we know that the New York Times does not have personal tax returns for 2018 for 2019. And it's possible that those could paint a very different picture. We don't know. Okay, so when information gets leaked to the media in the past couple presidential elections, it is often in a bad news campaign, meaning that the distribution entity is deliberately splitting it up into smaller products and leaking it out over time so that it is creating a splash in the news cycle and it doesn't just leave the news cycle. So for example, we are already seeing this in the New York Times and the Trump tax returns case. And it's not even that much information. I mean, we've seen terabytes of information leaked over the past decade. And in this case, Trump's tax returns are a relatively small amount of data, but even so, the New York Times is publishing a series of articles about it, dribbling it out over time. That's what we saw in 2016 with the Podesta emails, Hillary Clinton, her chief of staff, when his email got hacked. And it's what we're seeing today with the Trump campaign. So there's how much he paid in federal income taxes, how, quote, he engineered a sudden windfall, all kinds of stuff is just dribbling out. And they've also included charts and infographics. So we've got an infographic of the total income and how many taxes were paid. We have a chart that moves and changes just to make it more appealing to the public. So they're taking these very complex and dry documents, a huge archive, and distilling it into bite-sized chunks that the public can understand. That is not a simple task. That is fairly sophisticated, and it's become the new norm in data breaches that are weaponized. We're also seeing reports of other 2020 hacking activity. So this may not be the end. This may be only the beginning. Microsoft came out recently and reported on activities that they have found and in some cases shut down relating to 3 hacking groups. I'll tell you about them now. The first one is Strontium. Strontium is also known as Fancy Bear. If that rings a bell, it's because they were all over the past elections. Fancy Bear was responsible for the DNC hacks, for example. They are a Russia-based hacking organization, likely part of the GRU. And this year, according to Microsoft, they have attacked over 200 organizations, both in the Trump and the Biden campaigns. And importantly, that does not just include the campaign itself. It also includes advocacy groups. It includes consultants to the campaigns, political parties. If you think about it, if you want to leak an email that could potentially damage somebody, you could break into that person's email, or you could break into somebody's email who may have received that message and get it that way. So the information exists in many, many places, particularly if you're looking at messages or documents that are shared throughout a political party. Back in 2016, the primary method that Fancy Bear used to break into the DNC and other organizations was spear phishing. So they'd send a specially crafted message to the target, and the victim would click on it. They would get redirected to a website, and their password would get stolen. These days, we are seeing more sophisticated attacks. So they're engaged in obfuscation, making it much harder to detect when attacks are affiliated with Fancy Bear, which is making it harder to track them down and shut them down before it happens. They're also engaging in brute force and password spray. Part of the reason that happens is because so many passwords have been leaked these days. This summer, there was a study that showed 15 billion stolen username and password combinations are available on the dark web. So chances are pretty good your password has been stolen. And criminals are very good at creating variations on your password. They have automated tools that will test your password out in lots of places. And those are being used for the purposes of election hacking as well. We'll get in, at the end of this presentation, we'll get into how you can defend yourself. Okay, the second hacking group that Microsoft reported on is Zirconium. Zirconium is based in China. Reportedly, they have compromised, not attempted to compromise, but compromised over 150 organizations relating to this election. That was between March of 2020 and September 2020. And again, Microsoft says that since this time, they have been shutting down where they can the operations of Zirconium. They are targeting people who are associated with the presidential campaigns. One of the unsuccessful attacks that they had was targeting the Biden campaign, but specifically targeting the personal email accounts of people associated with the campaign. And that is really common. Again, that is exactly what we saw with the Hillary Clinton campaign hack in 2016, where her chief of staff's personal email was hacked and not so much his official campaign email. The reason they're targeting personal email is because, number one, often that's much harder for the campaigns to detect. And also, often you don't have the same protections. Campaigns have gotten very good at using two-factor authentication, and people don't use it quite as often on their personal email, for example. So, and at the same time, people often use personal email for work correspondence. Again, that's what we saw in 2016. And so they're targeting that. In this case, Zirconium did not successfully break into the Biden campaign. They're also targeting prominent international affairs consultants, academics, all kinds of people who might be associated with the campaign or have information around it. One tactic that is frequently used by Zirconium is web bugs. So they'll send an email and they'll get people to click that and go to a website, or they might just load the email and a little web bug will show that it was loaded. And even though the web page may or may not be malicious, part of it is just to collect information about whether that account is actually used and active so that they know whether to further target it. If you have any questions, please feel free to shout it out. And we'll have a little trivia here shortly as well. Okay, let's talk about more 2020 hacking activity. Microsoft also revealed the activities of Phosphorus. Phosphorus is a group based out of Iran that is engaged in espionage. So they target organizations with interests in the Middle East. And in May and June of 2020, they were targeting the Trump administration and also Trump campaign staff. So again, Microsoft has shut this down. We'll be keeping an eye on it, but so far the major threat seems to be coming again from Russia and also China. All right, so let's dig into the last US presidential campaign, examine the tactics and the techniques used, and see what we can learn about it, and what to expect today over the coming weeks. So in 2016, in early October, WikiLeaks released the Podesta emails. John Podesta was the chief of staff for the Hillary Clinton campaign, and his email account was hacked. Turned out it was his personal email, but there was still a huge volume of sensitive campaign-related correspondence in his personal email. And boom, WikiLeaks made a product out of it and put it out there. And they didn't put it out there all at once. That's the tricky part. They broke it into over 30 chunks. I think it was 36 chunks. And they dribbled it out day by day so it would make this bad news campaign. They also timed it really carefully. They were clearly sitting on this information for a while, just waiting until exactly the right moment. Because on October 7th, the Hollywood Access tape leaked. And Trump was recorded, as the Washington Post headline reads, having an extremely lewd conversation about women. So this was all over the media. It exploded. And 30 minutes later, the Podesta emails were leaked and caused a huge scandal for the Clinton campaign. So it got kind of crushed in the media. It wasn't nearly as impactful as it might otherwise have been. So timing is one of those key elements. Expect more in the coming weeks. We are seeing a lot of this this year, I think, overshadowed by some of the coronavirus related news. So that may be part of why we're not seeing as much this year. There's also some other reasons, though, which we'll get into. So what were the results of the Clinton email leak? Well, there were many, many revelations from these unvarnished emails. One of the biggest ones was Donna Brazile was actually fired as a CNN contributor because she had apparently leaked a town hall question to the Hillary Rodham Clinton campaign in advance, which is a huge no-no. Interestingly, I found her response fascinating. When she responded to this in the media, she said, I've seen so many doctored emails. I've seen things that come from me at 2 in the morning that I don't even send. There are several email addresses that I once used. This has not been verified. Good point, Donna Brazile. It has not been verified. And how do you know if an email is actually from a person or not? Well, it helps if you cryptographically sign all of your emails by default, which is exactly what Donna Brazile did. Or actually what the Hillary Clinton campaign did, excuse me. So some of the emails in there were cryptographically signed using DKIM. And here's the headline. From time to time, I get the questions in advance, and here she is sharing it. Here's one that worries me that Hillary Clinton might have a problem with, and it's leaked to the Clinton campaign. So we don't always have that luxury of having cryptographically signed emails, by the way, but that is one thing you can look for if you're trying to verify the authenticity of a piece of information or a message. All right, so how exactly was the Podesta email hacked? Well, we know exactly how they were hacked because John Podesta received a phishing email and then all of his emails were leaked to the public. Pretty helpful, right? So when he got that phishing email, we have a copy of it. Here's what it looked like. It looked like it was from Google, and it said, someone has your password. Ooh, that's scary. Hi, John. Someone just used your password to try to sign into your Google account. And you can see at gmail.com, his personal account. It provides the details. It says, Google, stop this sign-in attempt. You should change your password immediately. Change password. So what happened? Well, John Podesta was smart, and he forwarded this to their IT person and said, what should I do? And the IT person looked at it and said, this is legitimate, you should change your password. If he hadn't said that, we might have avoided a huge data breach. But unfortunately, at that point, John Podesta clicked the link or somebody working for him. And here's where it went, bit.ly. What is this? It is a URL shortening site that attackers often use to disguise where the true destination of your click is going. So in this case, the attackers, in this case, Fancy Bear, accidentally left some important information available to the public. It's possible to turn off public information about how many people have clicked on your bit.ly link, but the attackers didn't do that, so they made a mistake. And as a result, we can see that 2 people clicked on this link in late March. We can see that the URL went to myaccount.google.com/securitysettingpage.tk. That's a weird link. And then when this link is clicked on, it goes to a page that looks like this. One account, all of Google, John Podesta. It looks just like his normal Google sign-in page, but it's not. Again, you can see that URL is not anything actually relating to Google. It's a .tk domain. So as soon as he typed his password in, the criminals had it. And if he had had 2-factor authentication turned on his email, that might have prevented the worst. So just to go over what 2-factor authentication is when you verify someone's identity. And you can verify someone's identity with one of 3 ways. Something you know, like a password, something you have, like a little token or an app on your phone, and then something you are, like facial recognition or your fingerprints. So something you know, something you have, and something you are. A password is something you know. If John Podesta had also had an app on his phone or a token, then the criminals might have had a much harder time getting into his email, but he didn't, at least on his personal email. And the result is that all of his emails were downloaded probably in April or shortly after he clicked on his link. And then they were distilled into information products. So WikiLeaks, this is a screenshot from WikiLeaks, which is an information hosting site. We'll get into them in a second, leaked all the Podesta emails and made them searchable. So journalists could search by terms, as you can see on the screen, search by file name, search by email ID. There's advanced search options, which I use in my research. And then they distill them into more information products. Like you can see, read the Podesta emails, John Podesta and the Uranium One story, all these scandals that were ready for journalists to just pick up and throw into news articles as soon as they decided to leak this. So they clearly had this up and ready to go well before they leaked it on October 7th of 2016. This is a perfect example of Kompromat. Kompromat is a Russian term which loosely means compromising materials that are aimed to embarrass or discredit or otherwise scandalous materials that can influence how people perceive a person. A successful Kompromat campaign includes two things. Number one, you need an information product, and number two, you need a distribution platform. And both of these things have dramatically increased in sophistication over the past 2 decades. So when we were kids, there were no distribution platforms that could operate in the same way as WikiLeaks. If someone had, 50 gigabytes of information, you couldn't host that and connect it to the mainstream media. Even WikiLeaks themselves, when they were leaking things in 2007 and 2008, they did not have the ear of the New York Times. That changed. Before we jump into that, one early example of Kompromat used in a political sense was from Victoria Nuland. So Victoria Nuland was a top diplomat in Europe around the time of 2014. And the Ukraine had pulled out of a trade deal that would have favored Russia. And so in response to that, the United States sent her to the Ukraine to try to fix this situation for them. And Nuland had a phone call with a diplomat within the Ukraine. And on that phone call, she said, "F the EU." Apparently someone was recording this phone call because they posted it to YouTube, and then the Russian government, surprise, surprise, tweeted that out. So it briefly damaged relationships between the EU and the United States, briefly. Nuland herself, as you can see in the screenshot, said that the leaked phone call was, quote, "impressive tradecraft." And it's gotten more impressive since. So today, we have the ability to host very large volumes of sensitive information, terabytes of sensitive information. We have resilient hosting that even the full force of the United States cannot take down off the internet. These sites are able to gather attention from the mainstream media and distribute their information products all over the airwaves in front of you and me and everybody else. And there are teams of people who are prepared to pick out all the juicy details, experts who can distill this data even before it was released to the public. So let's jump in and find out how this infrastructure was built. This is Julian Assange. He may be familiar to some of you. Julian Assange ran a website called WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, according to Assange, is a giant library of the world's most persecuted documents. And WikiLeaks has changed the world. So here's some of the capabilities of WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks allows fully anonymous submissions that are protected by advanced security technology. This is critical because if somebody from, say, the IRS or the Department of Defense or any other sensitive organization wants to leak information, they can do so in a way that provides them with some assurance that they may not be traced back. So the leaker doesn't have to be the one that called the New York Times. The leaker can go through an intermediary and have the intermediary protect their identity and publish it. WikiLeaks also provides a reliable and resilient hosting platform. We'll see shortly how that has been tested seriously in the past. They have built connections with the mainstream media. WikiLeaks has millions of followers, so when anything gets published, there's millions of people, including mainstream journalists, that read it. There's a searchable database, very important for enabling people to find the juicy tidbits they're interested in, and their releases are often very carefully timed to maximize impact. Okay, time for your data breach trivia. Again, I have for a data breaches book. I have a book on data breaches, which you can win. When did the term data breach first come into popular use? So let me know when it was, and if you can, what case it was, what company caused it to happen. Again, when we were kids, the term data breach did not exist. When I was in high school, the term data breach did not exist. So when did it first come out? That gives you a few clues, because clearly I'm 25, right? All right, so let's talk about how WikiLeaks became this tool that transformed our politics. Not only did it help to transform the 2016 elections, since that time it has been used to as an example. There have been many entities that have copied the techniques that were first established by WikiLeaks. So the first Megaleak was Bradley Manning, the first political Megaleak. And Bradley Manning since has changed gender and changed her name to Chelsea Manning. For accuracy, I will use the pronoun that is appropriate for that time that I'm discussing. So back in 2010, Manning was known as Bradley Manning. And he was a US Army intelligence analyst based in Baghdad, and he had access to extremely sensitive and classified information, including databases of all the significant actions in the Iran and Afghanistan wars, and also many, many political communications from around the world. So over time, Manning started to be disturbed by the information that he was analyzing. He was very concerned about the ethics of some of the activities and the fact that much of the information was not being disclosed accurately to the American public, and he wanted to do something about it. So one day he was lip syncing to Lady Gaga, and he started burning some CDs of sensitive data. And this was not unusual because with all the dust and the heat of Baghdad, often their computers crashed. And so Manning had devised a system of backing up computers to CDs in order to make sure that they didn't lose their work. One day he took one of those CDs and put it in his pocket and went home to the United States on leave, where he decided to leak that information. He first tried calling some of the major mainstream news places and journalists, didn't get a response from them, and so then he leaked it to WikiLeaks. The information he stole included 391,000 reports relating to the Iraq War, classified, 91,000 reports on Afghanistan, files relating to Guantanamo Bay, and perhaps most damaging, over 250,000 US diplomatic cables. It was referred to when it came out as the greatest leak in United States military history. This rocked the Department of Defense, and honestly, it interfered with relationships around the world. And Manning probably never would have been caught, except he confessed. He confessed to this gentleman on the left, Adrian Lamo, who then notified the United States Department of Defense, and Bradley Manning was captured and put in US military prison. However, he had already leaked that information to none other than Julian Assange, who decided to go into hiding. The United States government wanted that information back. It had not been published. They wanted to get it back before Julian Assange put it up on the internet. And so he went into hiding. He ended up going to Germany, but he was afraid for 4 reasons. And these reasons were actually put forward to him by The Guardian, the editors of The Guardian, who wanted Julian Assange to share the information with them so that they could publish it. Number one, he was subject to physical risks. Somebody could beat him up and take the information. There were legal risks. He could be sued or tried in court. He is currently in a United States prison. There were technological risks. Somebody could just take down the WikiLeaks site, or so they thought. That didn't end up happening. Or there could be a public relations attack. Someone could attack or try to smear his character, which has also happened many, many times. The upshot is that Assange recognized that it was in his best interest to partner with the mainstream media. And so the New York Times, The Guardian, and the German magazine Der Spiegel got together and they formed a consortium. And Assange shared the data with them, which ended up being very helpful because they had huge volumes of data that needed to be understood. And it was only these mainstream media entities that actually had the experts that could truly understand the significance of all of this leaked information. So WikiLeaks combines their power with the press, and they find, of course, they are drowning in data. So each of these media organizations forms a war room and calls in their experts. And for months and months and months, they're going through, they're creating databases, they've pulled in specialists, and they're preparing their information products. And they decide to synchronize release. They actually decided that the New York Times was going to publish, I think it was 1 minute before the European companies, to reduce the risk that Chelsea Manning could be accused of having leaked information overseas. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. The Guardian messed up, not the Guardian, excuse me, Der Spiegel messed up and accidentally leaked the information a few hours before everybody else, but that was the goal. The goal was to synchronize all of the releases. So on July 25th in 2010, the Afghan war logs were released. In October of 2010, the Iraq war logs were released. So you can see the amount of time that they're spending going through these documents. And then finally, on November 28th, 2010, that was Cablegate. The first 200 diplomatic cables were released. Eventually, because of a goof up, all 251,000 cables were released, and they were completely unredacted, which was extremely damaging to US relations. Hillary Clinton had to go on an apology tour around the world. Reportedly, she actually made an apology tour jacket to apologize to everybody. It was called the 9/11 of world diplomacy for the United States. And here's what some of those information products look like. So WikiLeaks has the war diaries, which is still up today. And then the mainstream media started to produce, like, these are maps of all of the deaths in Baghdad and where they all occurred, because that information had not been fully reported up to that point. And again, there's information products, articles that describe how the results of the data analytics. There was a whole new phrase, data journalism, that popped up around this time. And you could actually download, you still can download the raw data itself in CSV files and see the deaths by month, who was wounded, the locations, everything. Everything was out there, and it was easy to digest. So at that time, WikiLeaks really came under fire. The United States government was trying its best to remove this information from the internet. Removing information from the internet is pretty hard to do, especially when it's on this massive scale, but they tried. WikiLeaks was hit with a massive distributed denial of service attack. They moved themselves to Amazon. Senator Joe Lieberman called Amazon, and Amazon pulled the plug on WikiLeaks' operation. They had their DNS entry removed. And then the financial hits started coming. PayPal suspended their accounts so that they couldn't actually take donations. Assange's bank accounts in Switzerland were closed. Of course, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The result of that was that WikiLeaks started taking donations in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and Assange was able to collect funds without having to rely on banks at all. They also set up distributed hosting. So they made a worldwide system of web proxies and mirrors so that if one site went down, another one could come up. Tor was at the back end so that you couldn't find those back end servers, at least not very easily without nation state funds. And there was fast DNS so that it was constantly changing and very difficult to take down. So, and the mainstream media was writing about this. Everyone was shocked. WikiLeaks demonstrates web resiliency. How, Scientific American, how has WikiLeaks managed to keep its website up and running? It was amazing. It was like the underdog is succeeding. The result of this was that WikiLeaks gained over 5 million followers and became a major global media player. And Julian Assange was named Times Person of the Year for 2010, at least the Reader's Choice Times Person of the Year. So how far we have come, Julian Assange. This was when he was at the top of his game. Bradley Manning, on the other hand, was sentenced to 35 years in prison. And while in prison, changed her gender. Her sentence was commuted by the Obama administration, and she walked free after 7 years and ended up running for Senate. So again, a lot of drama. But the upshot is that the result of the Bradley Manning case was that we came out of this with a Megaleaks machine. WikiLeaks became this example of a new phenomenon where they had collaboration with the mainstream media. They were able to do analysis and authenticate these huge complex data repositories using specialists and experts from around the world. They had standards for redaction. They had tactics for presenting and communicating key points to the public and distilling things into information products. They understood the value of timing and had strategies for timing releases to maximize attention and reduce risk. And above all, they had a very strong social media following that allowed them to disseminate information very quickly. There have been a lot of questions about how is this allowed to happen? How come WikiLeaks, well, some people said in the past, how come Julian Assange isn't in prison? Julian Assange is in prison. But in general, publishing information is not a crime. So that's why the New York Times was able to publish information about the Trump tax returns. There is a difference in our society between stealing information or leaking information and publishing it. And the freedom of the press is extremely important. This has been upheld by the Supreme Court numerous times, perhaps most famously in the Pentagon Papers case in the 70s, when Daniel Ellsberg leaked information to the New York Times and other mainstream media members, and they wanted to publish it. The Nixon administration tried to stop them and muzzle the press, and the Supreme Court ruled that that was not possible, that the New York Times could publish that information. On the flip side, journalists are not allowed to hack themselves, and news organizations can't hack themselves. And that's why Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks has always been very careful not to tell people to hack, not to encourage hackers, so that they're not associated with an actual theft of information. The reason the News of the World became such a scandal is because journalists were hacking into, for example, voicemails of major media figures and the royal family, and then leaking that information for their own purposes so that they could get the scoop. So they were arrested. Even the CEO of the News of the World was arrested, and they are no longer in business. It was a huge embarrassment. So there's a difference between free speech, the mainstream media or any media outlet publishing information, and then stealing that information. And when stuff like the Trump tax returns gets leaked, that might be a crime. That might be a data breach, actually stealing or leaking that information, but publishing it is not. I bring this up because one of the things that came up on September 28th was Donald Trump saying that the taxes were illegally obtained, and a lot of people started wondering, does that mean that the New York Times it's illegal for them to publish it? The answer is no. The New York Times is not breaking the law by exposing the tax returns. It's stealing it is another thing. The other thing that has come up just this morning, here I'll flip ahead, is that Trump has filed an emergency request for the Supreme Court to stop the release of his tax returns. And honestly, I think this is a good example of what we call officially the Streisand Effect, where trying to stop the release of something actually brings a lot more attention to it. The origin of this term comes from the California Coastal Records Project that flew up and down California's coast taking pictures of it. And Barbara Streisand found this picture that you see here of her house on the internet and demanded that the California Coastal Records Project take it down. So before she did this, 6 people had viewed the picture of her house. She sued them for $50 million, which generated a huge amount of press. She lost the lawsuit. And since then, over 1 million people have downloaded the picture of her house. In fact, you can see this picture from the internet, Barbara Streisand's house with an arrow on it. So often trying to stop the release of information can result in a lot more attention coming to it. All right, so Maddie, did anybody get the answer to our trivia question?
I believe that the first submission was from Mark Schneider, and he had data breach from DSW Shoe Warehouse, March 2005.
Ooh, it is March 2005. Well, actually, it's February 2005 with ChoicePoint. Did anybody get that?
Not see that yet.
Ah, okay. Well, Mark, we'll give it to you because you're very, very close. DSW Shoes was 1 month later. The very first one was February 2005, ChoicePoint. ChoicePoint was a background check company. They were a spinoff of Equifax, interestingly enough. And they held huge volumes of information about the American public, including social security numbers, background checks, insurance information, all kinds of stuff. Their goal was to help businesses make smart choices, everything from hiring to whether or not to underwrite a person. And it turned out a ring of Nigerian criminals had gained access to large volumes of sensitive information about people. It was, I think at the time, 135 to 145,000 records, they said, which might seem small now, but back then it created a huge scandal throughout the United States. And Senator Dianne Feinstein was the first person I saw to use the term data breaches, because they used to talk about cardholder data breaches and credit card stuff, but because there was no cardholder data specifically, it was all shortened into data breaches. So data breaches are becoming all too common, and current federal law does not require notification to consumers. So thank you so much for playing. 2005 with ChoicePoint is the answer. And Mark, drop me a line or shoot Maddie your email, and I will get you that code to Data Breaches, the book. All right, so moving along, after WikiLeaks happened, we started to see copycats. And one of the most important election-related copycats was the Panama Papers case. This is a case that these days gets very little attention, but it was probably absolutely fundamental in setting the stage for the 2016 election data breaches. So in the Panama Papers case, there was a law firm, Mossack Fonseca, out of Panama. And somebody leaked an enormous treasure trove of information from Mossack Fonseca, over 11.5 million documents in April 2016. And the result was this really a set of information products. You can see on the right, the Panama Papers. Here's one of the articles from The Guardian, how the world's rich and famous hide their money offshore. They made, I had here, oh, I forgot to include it. They actually had a game that they put up. It was from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. You could play a game called Stairway to Tax Heaven or Haven, and play this interactive game to learn about all the different players in the scandals that they had uncovered. A lot of it was very focused around Putin's cronies. And there's nothing specifically that ties the leaker to someone who was trying to discredit Putin, but Putin himself came out and said this was an attempt to destabilize Russia right before Russia's presidential elections in 2016. And here you can see 11 million secret files, 140 politicians from more than 50 countries. This impacted politicians around the world. It was certainly not just Putin. And so, oh, sorry, I think this was actually 2015. I'll have to correct that. So anyway, he saw the Panama Papers as a personal attack in April of 2016, and he wanted to take revenge. There's a recent book that just came out from Russian authors about that. And so going into the story behind the Panama Papers, we don't actually know who leaked all these 11.5 million documents. And the law firm has since gone out of business in part because of this data breach. The leakers reportedly someone named John Doe, who calls themselves John Doe. And John Doe came out with a manifesto and said, I'm doing this because I want to make these crimes public. It's for a noble cause. And John Doe comes out and says, for the record, I do not work for any government or intelligence agency, and I never had. Is this true? Surprisingly, there doesn't seem to be anyone who has dug into this. And it's a balancing act because mainstream media does not want to reveal their sources. But then again, you have to sort of question the motivations behind this. And a big question is, what was left out? Okay, so there was a lot of focus on Putin and a lot of information surrounding his cronies. Were there any high-level American politicians that were left out, or politicians from other countries that might have been left out? So we don't know if we're getting a skewed picture here. And the lack of information about the source makes it difficult to really fully assess that. But if you see something like this, here's my manifesto. I don't work for any government agency, and I never have. Question that because we'll see how it came up in the DNC hack and how that a very similar statement was actually undermined. So this set the stage for the DNC hacks, which reportedly were done by the Russian government. Apparently, according to the authors of this new Russian memoir, Putin was very angry, wanted to take revenge, hacked into the DNC, and found this, that they had huge treasure troves of data. Now, the DNC found out that they were hacked, and they decided to announce it themselves. They didn't want to wait for somebody else to announce it. They followed kind of best practice in politics. Tell it early and tell it yourself. It was June. They came out with an article and said, the Russian government hacked the DNC, stole opposition research on Trump. They didn't say anything more than that, but opposition research was stolen. The data was kind of downplayed a little bit, and they thought that was that. Well, it turns out that the game had changed. Often when a data breach happens, a company announces that there's been a breach, full disclosure, and then everybody kind of moves on. That's best practice to help avoid a scandal. The next day, someone named GUCCIFER 2.0 came out, and GUCCIFER 2.0 had a WordPress website and said, GUCCIFER 2.0 DNC's servers hacked, DNC's servers hacked by a lone hacker. Worldwide known cybersecurity company CrowdStrike announced that the Democratic National Committee servers had been hacked by sophisticated hacker groups. And he comes out and says, I'm pleased that the company appreciated my skills so highly. It was not a sophisticated hacker group. It was not the Russian government. It was actually very easy, and I did it alone. I am a lone hacker. Sound familiar? Very similar to John Doe's manifesto. I don't work for any government. I'm an independent person. And in fact, the original GUCCIFER was an independent person based out of Romania who had hacked into like George Bush's email, gotten pictures of his paintings, and Colin Powell, and all kinds of other people. So even the name is kind of a throwback to that previous persona. But GUCCIFER 2.0 turned out to be someone very different. And in the following months, they leaked out information bit by bit by bit, drip by drip, to make that bad news campaign, like we're used to seeing, a dossier on Hillary Clinton from the DNC expected. You know, they're telling journalists, be on the alert. Here's the dossier the next day. Want to know more about GUCCIFER 2.0? Here's an FAQ, July Trumpocalypse, and the other DNC plans for July. They also, GUCCIFER 2.0 reportedly was in communication with Roger Stone. The person or group told the public and journalists to message them if they wanted more information. We saw political consultants and bloggers message them and received huge treasure troves of information, such as the DNC's plans for advertising. Millions of dollars worth of sensitive data about the DNC's tactics for the election were leaked in the months beforehand in 2016. Absolutely hurt them. And in fact, Republican consultants have come out and said that they modified their plans based on the information that was leaked. WikiLeaks then, on July 22nd, posted a full database of the DNC's emails. So again, this was a searchable database, very easy to turn into information products, and it absolutely damaged the Democratic National Committee. The CEO had to resign for making derogatory statements about the Bernie Sanders campaign. So there's Debbie Wasserman Schultz resigning, so all of a sudden they're leaderless, they're thrown into disarray. I just wanted to show you this leaked email that shows some of the challenges in securing the DNC at that time. So this is from Rachel Palermo of the Democratic National Committee. She emailed the regional press and said, "We've been compromised, but it's all okay." This was in April. "Here's our new password. It will now change every few weeks to prevent further issues. So as it is reset, I will forward it along." Not really very helpful if your email has been hacked, unfortunately. So the way they were sharing passwords was very, left them open to attacks. GUCCIFER eventually was traced very easily to the Russian intelligence agency. So first of all, there were articles about the fact that he claimed to be a Romanian. He clearly was not. He didn't speak very good Romanian. He also didn't speak very good English, for that matter, at first. And then all of a sudden later on, he suddenly had very good English, probably changed to a different person. And then at one point he revealed that he was in fact a Russian intelligence officer. So game over. Again, when you see those claims of being a lone hacker or I do not work for a government agency, really question them and think to yourself, how did this person or organization get this information? All right, what can we expect in the coming weeks? There are some loose ends that have not been closed. Obviously, there may be some campaigns that have been hacked and we don't yet know it. Maybe it's not the right time to disclose that information. We do know for sure that a law firm in New York named Grumman-Shire was hacked. One of the reasons I wanted to show this screenshot is because it is my favorite data breach screenshot ever. Papa Don't Breach, because one of their clients was Madonna. Turns out one of their other clients also had dealings with Donald Trump. So you can see all these files were leaked to the public. And they came out, Revil, which is the gang behind this, came out and said, "We have dirt on Trump, pay us $42 million and we'll give it to you, whoever you are." And so this was out there for a little while. And then they posted another message that said, "Hey, it's been sold to an interested party. Sorry guys, we're done." And reportedly, they only sold it to one interested party, but really what's to stop them from selling it to multiple interested parties? Do you trust criminals? I don't. But that does not appear to have come out yet. So did the Trump campaign themselves buy it to keep it quiet? Did one of their opponents buy it? Were the hackers the only people that got a hold of it? We don't know. And we don't know if it's come out yet, but stay tuned. So what can you do to protect yourselves and also to help protect our elections? The number one thing you should do is deploy multi-factor authentication on your personal email, on your work email, on any cloud websites you can. Again, we talked about what multi-factor authentication is, something you know and something you have. In my opinion, the most effective form of MFA today that is free and available to everybody is an app on your phone. You can get these for free. Google Authenticator is a good one. Microsoft also has a free authenticator if you use Office 365. It takes 5 minutes to set up. If you go to lmgsecurity.com, my company's website, /passwords, we have little videos that show you how to set that up. So feel free to take advantage of that. Run, don't walk, set up multi-factor authentication because your passwords have been stolen. You should assume that somebody either has or will soon have your password. That's why it's important to deploy a password manager. The average person has over 200 passwords that you need to remember and manage. And so a lot of people end up reusing the same password or slight variants of it. When you put like a 1 or an 8 or a 9 at the end of it, or you change 2019 to 2020, they're onto you. You are not being sneaky. And they know how to make variations of that as well. And you guys with the exclamation points at the end and stuff like that, they're onto you too. So use a password manager so that it will remember the passwords for you and it will generate a unique password for every website. And that way, if your Twitter password is stolen, your email won't get broken into. It also allows for secure storage and sharing of passwords much more securely with other people, so you don't have to email a bunch of people if a password changes, like the DNC. They cost about $3 to $4 a month typically, and you can deploy them for a whole organization. So we'll make this available afterwards, but you can see a few of the common options are LastPass, Dashlane, 1Password, things like that. Phishing defense is critical. I know I sound like a broken record probably, but think before you click. Think before you click. Make sure you have effective spam filtering, that you're running a web proxy, that you're training people, and you're looking you're staying up to date on the latest trends. But above all, just think before you click. If you're not sure about clicking on something, call the person that sent it to you, or just go to that website by typing it into a URL. Okay, and finally, for the public, make sure that you're thinking critically. If you see any information leaked, first stop and think, is this authentic? Is it real? And how do we know? And do I trust the people that vetted this? Where did it come from? You want to think about that because it'll tell you the likelihood of that information being skewed. Could it have been modified? That's sort of a creepy thought. What if most of it is accurate, but important tiny little things have been modified? Why might this have been leaked? Is there some agenda behind it? And what is left out? And push journalists for answers like, who is John Doe? Does this really hold water? Does this make sense? I just want to mention before we go that I am teaching a cyber first responder class on November 5th. The early bird registration is tomorrow. So if you're concerned about getting hacked, learn about how you can respond very quickly. We do hands-on labs for incident responders, great for any IT folks in your organization. Again, it's a one-day class. You can learn how to respond to ransomware incidents, cloud incidents, business email compromise, all kinds of stuff in one day. Really intense. So if you register by tomorrow, there's $50 off. And I included a discount code for the community. I don't know if someone wants to type it into chat. The discount code is NCC 6739. So feel free to use it. And you can still sign up after tomorrow. You just get that $50 discount till tomorrow. So with that, why don't we hang out and take some questions for a couple minutes? I'll turn it back over to you, Maddie.
Thank you so much, Sherri. That was just insane. I wrote a ton of notes. It was fascinating. Thank you very, very much. So if you have any questions, there is a Q&A box at the bottom. I didn't see a question, but Mark did make a note. Speaking of today's news, it appears that a computer repairman leaked email about a Joe Biden meeting with an advisor to the board of Burisma while Hunter was employed by them. And I guess the Senate committee is investigating that. So your talk
fascinating.
is as timely as ever.
I think we're going to see more leaked emails over the next few weeks. So it'll get interesting. It's going to heat up, I'm sure.
Well, and so, you know, as you were talking, there were a couple things that were coming to my mind. First, when you were talking through just some of those very simple, basic protection measures, why do you think more people don't take advantage of those things, especially people that would have really, frankly, really, really important information to be compromised?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, everybody's really busy, and often it's just sort of the last thing on the list that people think about. I think it can also be really daunting if you don't know how to set up multi-factor authentication to try to set it up. So there's a coefficient of friction there, which you can overcome. We can overcome that. Let's do it, everybody. It's really not that hard. And yeah, I mean, I think the other thing a lot of people think is nobody's going to break into my email. And I see that even from CEOs who would think, I don't have anything important in my email. And after someone breaks into it, you will realize how much sensitive data you have. In fact, email is the keys to the kingdom for many of us. It can be used to reset your passwords for like every other website you use. It often has sensitive information like social security numbers or health information or just strategies and tactics. So be really careful. And yes, people are trying to break into your email. That is true for all of us.
And switching gears, but that was what came to top of mind when you were talking through those pieces. You mentioned briefly about federal law not having an enforceability around the sharing of that information from a press standpoint. What do you think there are any federal changes that you could see happening that would, I don't know, either disincentivize people from trying to get this information or increase the penalties for it? What do you see on a federal policy level?
Yeah, so we are, with respect to data breaches, I mean, we're seeing movement in laws, state laws in particular, that are trying to, that require notifications and things like that, and lawsuits after data breaches happen. So unfortunately, it's a very roundabout thing. I have not seen a whole lot of movement in penalties for people stealing information. It's just hard to track it down. There have been a number of cases just in the past year where cyber criminals have been caught and are being indicted and charged. And so that's been nice to see. But no, I'm quite sure we're not going to see changes to the freedom of the press, which is really that fundamental issue. And it's a fine line. You know, free speech is very important. It is also important for whistleblowers to be able to talk to the mainstream media as well. And so we do need that separation. But certainly stealing information is a crime in most cases, and there are penalties against it if that person is caught.
It's just the challenge of getting them. One of our listeners just asked a question about if you could spend a moment on the security issues around Square, since many small merchants are using it.
Yeah, I think I have a whole presentation on credit card security and payment card security. I actually work with some of the major card brands on that. I think that's a whole can of worms. So drop me a line on LinkedIn and I'm happy to analyze Square for you and we can talk about some of the pros and cons. I have to say I am really excited about the rise of tokenization. That means contactless payments and click to pay online, because that means like when you use contactless payments instead of like sticking your MagStripe card in or even your chip card in, contactless payments typically are tokenizing your data, meaning the credit card number itself is being substituted and the card number is not being given to a zillion merchants that you work with. So contactless payments are absolutely the way to go. And bonus, they will reduce your risk of spreading a virus as well. So they are significantly up this year. So that's one of the trends in payment card security that I'm really excited about.
Okay, and you can be found on LinkedIn just under your name?
Yep, look for me on LinkedIn. Feel free to drop me a line. Happy to talk more.
Fantastic. Well, Sherri, again, thank you so very, very much. Oh, wait, one more question, sorry. So Microsoft has rolled out features to protect election-related organizations. Has G Suite rolled anything out?
Yeah, I mean, all of the major providers of email are working diligently to protect all organizations, not just election-related organizations, and they are proactively working to identify threats and remove them. Google is no exception to that. Microsoft just happens to have announced some of their activities to the world in the past few weeks. So, but yep, you're absolutely going to see that with G Suite as well. And you should take advantage of two-factor authentication on G Suite for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, thank you so very, very much. It was truly, I wish you had been able to put it in the book, but I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to share it here. And you do have a handout for audience members, so we will be sending that out to all of you after the presentation. And just again, thank you so much. We highly recommend taking advantage of your trainings, and we just truly appreciate you sharing this background and expertise with us.
Thanks so much, Maddie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody who joined today. Stay tuned, and we'll continue our series throughout the rest of the year. So thanks again. Have a great day, everyone.